Welcome to WCAT. I'm Kiki Latimer, and I'm your host for the Catholic Bookworm, where we read to learn, but we share with love in order to understand. And I'm very happy to have with me today Father Kevin Codd. Welcome, Father Kevin.
Thank you. Nice to be with you, Kiki.
Father Kevin's book, To the Field of Stars, came to me via another book about the Camino de Santiago, a pilgrim's journey to Santiago de Compostela. But this has actually become I've read a lot of books about the Camino.
Yeah.
But I have to say yours is one of my favorites. I just loved it, which is why I got in touch with you. Just a beautiful book. So I'm excited to share it with our listeners here today.
Thank you.
Want to start us off with a prayer?
Sure. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Lord, our loving God, our Father, our Creator, we thank you for the blessings of this life. We thank you for the blessings of love that bind us together as sisters and brothers. We thank you most especially during this Easter season for the gift of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, risen from the dead, whom we continue to celebrate. We praise you for the gift of the Holy Spirit that soon comes to us in the Feast of Pentecost, that makes us a church, that makes us live and breathe together with the breath and love of Jesus himself. We ask your special blessings on our new Pope, Leo, and for all of our Catholic and Christian sisters and brothers around the world, especially those who may be persecuted or oppressed in any way. We thank you for the gift of pilgrimage, and we ask your blessings on all who are in the midst of pilgrimages in one way or another, either walking real roads along real paths towards holy cities, or those who are on other kinds of spiritual pilgrimages. Bless their way with your light and your grace. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from every evil. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
It's interesting, when you say there's just so many different kinds of pilgrimages. Some are internal and some are external with our feet.
Yeah.
Beautiful. For people listening who don't know you, want to tell us a little bit about yourself to start off?
Sure. Happy to do that. I'm Father Kevin Codd. I'm a priest of the Diocese of Spokane in Washington State. Spokane is not Seattle. We are the second city in the state, and we're on the east side of the state, so inland. So our diocese is composed of one large urban area, the city of Spokane, but a lot of rural area as well. A lot of agricultural country, apple orchards, fruit orchards, potato, wheat country, and so our pastoral experience over the years is really mixed. We get city parishes, urban parishes, suburban parishes, and usually a lot of experience out in the smaller rural areas, which also, of course, means that we have a lot of experience with Latino, Hispanic communities, immigrant communities and it was because of that I was able to eventually pretty much learn Spanish and be conversant in Spanish, and which has been a very great gift for me. I had two detours along the way from just regular pastoral ministry. When I was much younger, I had visions of being a missionary in our diocese. Had a mission in Guatemala, up in the highlands of Guatemala for many years already, since 1958 or 60, when American dioceses were asked to take on those responsibilities. And so I went to Guatemala, to a village called Santa Catarina Ixtuacan, up in the mountains of, if anybody knows Guatemala, then it's above Lake Sololá. and pardon, I'm sorry, Lake Atitlan. Sololá is the city, and I was there for a year. Had a magnificent experience. It was really, really difficult. I learned a lot, but in those days, there was very little Spanish spoken. It was mostly the local indigenous language, and anyway, it turned out to be a year was enough for me. But then I came home to the diocese, worked in the parishes some more, and then eventually got a call to see if I would be willing to serve as vice rector of our seminary in Belgium, where I had done my theological training in Louvain at the American College of the Immaculate Conception. And eventually my bishop at the time agreed, and so I went back overseas. I'd studied there myself, and spent 2 years as vice rector and 6 years as rector president of the American College there, American College of the Immaculate Conception. While there, I finished my doctorate, which I never really began earlier in my life, but I was able to complete that and did a dissertation on the Belgian missionaries who had been trained in Louvain, had been trained actually at the American College, who in great numbers came out to the Pacific Northwest and did much of the hard work of kind of setting the foundations of the church here in the middle to late 19th century. Then I retired a couple of years ago, and I said, well, I'm too young to just sit in a rocking chair. It's not my thing quite yet anyway.
No rest for the weary.
Yeah. So I thought about options, and I said, well, eventually I just decided I should do something new and something I've never done before and go to a place I've never been before. And so I had some students. I was pastor of our Newman Center at Washington State University for a few years, and I had a few Ecuadorian graduate students there, and they kept saying, oh, Padre, you need to come to Ecuador. You need to visit us and visit our beautiful country. And so I started noodling around on the internet, and lo and behold, discovered that there was a small expat English-speaking community in the city of Cuenca. And so I got in touch and said, you guys need a priest down there? For a while, they said, yes, of course. Who doesn't? Right. And so I went down. I've been there now about 2.5 years, primarily caring for the English-speaking Catholics that are there, which is considerable. Altogether, we're probably 8,000 maybe expats in the city of Cuenca, and whatever percentage of that is Catholic. And I also serve as chaplain to a small community of nuns, in Spanish, Las Sierras de Maria, the servants of Mary. And so I say daily mass for them most days of the week, and they're sweet and lovely. Their ministry, besides their community life and life of prayer, is taking care of the sick in their homes. So people who are dying or are very ill, they kind of like hospice care for people. So their headquarters is in Madrid, Spain. I think they're on our side of the world. It's in St. Louis or someplace. I'm not sure. Somewhere in the U.S. But anyway, that's my gig for the time being. My pastoral gig.
Yeah. So, it's funny, when I first saw the title of your book, To the Field of Stars, of course, I've heard of Santiago de Compostela, but I never knew what Compostela meant. I never had any idea, and it was a little while before I put the two together, as I started reading your book. So how did you wind up doing? Tell us about how you wound up deciding to go do this. I mean, I've thought about it. I almost made it there a couple of years ago, and then I wound up with back issues. But it's on my bucket list, as they say.
Good. I hope so.
And your book raised it back up. Each page, I was like, I've got to get there. Lord, get me there. But we'll see.
Yeah. Well, I had heard about it. I don't even remember where. It was not. Back. 20 years ago, it was not well known in the English-speaking world, at least in North America. Canadian people had more knowledge than I think US people did. So it was really unknown. And I had read something or come across it in Europe. And I had a friend, a priest friend, who knew something about it. And so, he shared with me. So it was on one of those lists that sort of in the back of your head someday. While I'm here in Europe, that would be nice to do. But I never had much real idea of what would be involved. And then for the first years that I was in Belgium working there, my mother was still alive, actually, in this house where I am now. And so whenever I had free time or vacation time or a break, I would come home and spend some time with her and my family members. And then when she passed away, I thought, well, I'm kind of free. I can, I can do next summer. I can do something completely outrageous if I want. And somehow the idea of walking this Camino thing came up, and so eventually.
How many miles? Like 500 miles?
If you start at the French border, it's and follow what they call the French Camino. Yes, it's about 500 miles. So I, bought a backpack and bought some other stuff and didn't know anything what I was doing, and took the train down from Belgium south through France and then to Bordeaux, and then you take a smaller train up to the small French village of Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, which is right. It's probably not even 20 miles from the Spanish frontier, but it's in the middle of the Pyrenees. So you have to climb up to get there. The train takes you uphill for quite a ways, and you get off the train, and there are a few other pilgrims with backpacks, and you say, well, where do we go? And they say, we don't know. You kind of find your way into the center of the town, and there was an office there, and I bought the traditional shell that's the symbol of the pilgrimage, and hung it around my neck. And I got there at about 10 in the morning, and I said, is it too late to start today? And they said, if you hurry, you don't. So I started climbing through the Pyrenees, and the first day is really a high climb. You really go up, and you just switch backs and until you get to the top, and then you start going down. And it was that was really tough. That's the hardest day, but it was also the most splendid day, because once I got to the top, it was magnificent up there, with the fog and the sheep with their bells and that was probably one of the most powerful moments, getting to the top and having sort of this mountaintop experience up there, which I think I describe in the book. So that's how I started. I didn't know much, and I just had a pair of old boots that I'd already, had. God knows, they barely lasted, but they lasted. And
you didn't do a lot of practice walks,
no,
right?
I went out once. That was it. I didn't know.
That'd be me.
I paid a price for that, but it was also, in a way, it was beautiful to have the experience unfold without any preconceptions either. And I was, in one way, you're walking alone. I wasn't walking with anybody, but in another way, you start making, I don't want to say friends, you start making brothers and sisters along the way. And that was a lovely part of the whole experience.
Mm-hmm. You share a lot on it. I mean, you're saying you're not so much friends with brothers and sisters, and brothers and sisters can get on your nerves.
Oh, they do. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, there's. I was really lucky. I mean, I had every time if you stop for a rest day, you lose your companions, because they go on and you don't, and sometimes you see them again and sometimes you don't, and those were very hard days for me when I had to take a break, because it meant losing your companions and your friends and your brothers and sisters, as I said.
But sometimes you bump into them again.
You would, yeah, and that was great. But there were people that, I was pretty honest about my limitations with some people's personalities. I wasn't nearly, but that's the point, in a sense, is you go to learn and to experience yourself and your graces as well as your limitations. And some people really bothered me, annoyed me, and I tried to be honest about that. I had one little lady in my parish after she read the book, my last parish here in Spokane before I retired, and said, "Father, why did you write so many bad things about yourself?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. What do you want me to do? To paint a halo around my own head?" And she said, "Oh, no, I don't want that." So,
I mean, one of the things I loved about your book was your just honesty about yourself, honesty about life, other people, your external pilgrimage, but also your internal pilgrimage,
yeah.
that it wasn't all like a bed of roses, like
No.
struggles.
Yeah. Yes, and that was, it's both internal and external, and as we were reminded fairly often by people who'd walked previous to us, they would say, well, the physical struggle, the physical challenge is one thing, but the deeper challenge is mental, spiritual. You get those days when you want to quit, when you're saying, what am I doing out here? And I'm never going to get this thing done. 12 miles a day on a 500-mile hike, this is just impossible. And especially if you were hurting, if you had tendonitis or something like that going on, there were days where you just said, this is crazy. But then there's
sounds
also
like life. Sounds a lot like life. Like, why am I doing this?
It becomes really a pattern for life. It is just like life. And that was one of the beautiful things afterwards, is realizing that I had experienced, in a sense, a template for life and for ministry out there. That what I experienced out there in 30 some days is really a template for what you experience across the course of your lifetime. You start out pretty innocent and full of enthusiasm and energy, and then the hard knocks of life and of the way sort of work you over and humble you, and you're heading towards this, in the case of the physical pilgrimage, this holy city, Santiago de Compostela, and all that's there. But you also, scaling that up to life, we're all heading towards the holy city of Jerusalem, the eternal Jerusalem, and it's described in the book of Revelations, and that's what allows you to understand the difficulties of the moment in whatever you're experiencing. And I think that's why it's so popular, has become so popular with North Americans now, and the Korean. There's a lot of Korean pilgrims now. The majority I hear are now Americans, or close to it. When I walked, there were very few Americans out there.
I mean, we have this culture now, this unchurched culture, just searching for meaning, searching for holy ground.
Yeah, and that was one of the reasons I wrote the book. There's this whole side of the Camino which has been sort of turned into a spiritual, non-religious, I don't want to use the word New Age because that's sort of out of fashion, but the Camino itself becomes sort of a god. The Camino will take care of you. The Camino will guide you. The Camino will do this. And they come up with sort of words that are not churchy words or not spiritual, for what for what we would call providence. They would say, well,
God.
Yeah, what we would call God or providence or grace. There's sort of this not lack of vocabulary, and you would see the young people struggling to put into words what they were experiencing, and you say, well, we have that vocabulary. It needs to be and that, I felt like that was part of the reason of writing the book, was to put the religious vocabulary back to work. What is happening here? This is grace. This is God at work. This is the saints. We have this company of saints that's with us. We're not alone in this. Communion, it's not just friendship. We experience over time a real communion with one another. Worship, every once in a while you'd come into a little place where they would have a pilgrim's mass, and you could just see so many of the pilgrims just sort of flopping into the pews and open, burned out, completely gutted spiritually, and then they would go light a candle, and you'd say, yes. That's part. Our vocabulary is not just words; it's also things like lighting candles.
We have this God who told us, "I am the Camino."
Yeah. Exactly. And so that was part of my intention in sharing the book. And as it turns out, I think it worked. The book is now 20 years old, almost 20 years old, and it's still selling. Not a lot, not in great numbers anymore. It really took off after Martin Sheen and Emilio Esteves movie. It had been out already for a few years when that hit. But that's what really stoked interest, I think, in North Americans.
The film The Way.
Yeah. And I'm grateful to both of them for making that film. It was nice. It was well done.
Now, you made the decision to walk without your collar.
Yeah. It wasn't even a decision. I didn't even think about it, actually. Looking back on it, I don't have any regrets about that. First of all, it would be difficult. Well, I mean, it would be an extra challenge. But I wasn't doing this as a ministry. I mean, I didn't conceive of it, at least initially, as a ministry to others. I just saw it as something I needed to do for myself. I needed a break. My mother had passed away. I was just had passed 50 years, and I thought, well, this would be a nice way to sort of, like, you go on a retreat. You don't go on a retreat to give a retreat. You go on a retreat for yourself. And that's the way I was looking at it. And there was sort of an ethos, at least in those days, out there that you pick up right away. It's which you don't ask too many questions about other people's lives. So you get a name and where they're from, and but people. There's sort of part of it is it's not. I mean, Americans find that hard because we immediately go into, well, what do you do? And
Right.
and maybe that's changed, but at that time, really wasn't done very much. And so you would walk with people for days sometimes and become friendly, and then I remember coming out in one place where we had there was a church there, and small church, and I went to the back and asked the priest if I could concelebrate, and he said, of course. And so I came out into the sanctuary, of course, vested, and some of my pilgrim friends were there. That was the first they realized I was a priest. And one lady from Latin America was kind of upset with me. And why didn't you tell us? And I said, and what are we supposed to call you now? I said, you call me Kevin. That's what you've been calling me. I still, and another lady, when that similar thing happened, she said, I sort of thought that you were a priest, and I don't know why, but I felt like that maybe that was what you were. And she said, because you're so patient, or something like that. And I said, well, I don't feel that patient always, but that was. But you do end up ministering along the way, and I think a lot of people do, because you have to. When you're down, somebody carries you. When someone else is down, you help carry them, and you tend to them. And that was that became I think people appreciated the fact that I was a priest more because they discovered it sort of from who I was rather than from advertising myself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It made sense in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was beautiful. I loved it though when people sort of, that there was, thanks be to God and grace, that there was something in you that spoke for the collar, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
When people did see,
Yeah.
I mean, our hope is that people do see Christ in us. I mean, that's
Yeah.
our prayer.
Yeah. And I know other priests or clergy make a different choice. They do wear either their robes or and that's beautiful too. That it was a different choice, but it was again, it was hardly a choice. I just sort of did it. It was not, it wasn't something I thought about. The same thing happened a few years ago. I worked as a hospitalero in the little village of Gragnon for a couple of weeks, and and I'd be doing, the pilgrims would start arriving, about 10 or 11 in the morning, depending on when they left the previous place. And so I'd be in there, cleaning bathrooms and showers and toilets and have my rubber gloves on and receive them and get them signed in and welcome them and show them around and get them settled. And then we had, before dinner, they had mass in the church, which was with the pilgrim, the posada was part of the church, and several times I celebrated that mass, and you could see these pilgrims look up when I walked into the sanctuary. The guy that they had met with the rubber gloves and the toilet brush in his hand. And that was nice. That was really nice. And by then the book had been out for a while, and there was a copy there, and so it was really nice because some of the pilgrims had read the book and they were happy to meet me in real life. And that was
well, our dear Pope Francis said you're supposed to smell like the sheep. So
yeah, in that case, I did. Yeah.
When you think back on the Camino, do you have what's your favorite memory or a couple of your favorite memories? I mean, I'm sure they're shared in the book.
Yeah. There are many. One of my favorite memories, and it is in the book, is I was having probably one of my worst mornings ever. And I was somewhere out in the middle of, had been on the trail for a couple of weeks by then. And this was one of those days where you didn't sleep well and you're tired and didn't have any energy and you had to get down the road anyway. And I stopped in this little town to have a coffee in the morning and, really just exhausted and burned out and tired of it all and kind of ready to cash in my chips. I said, I'm done. I'll just take the train the rest of the way. And I was sitting at this little cafe and having a cup of coffee, and there were other pilgrims there, but they were in a group and they paid no attention to me. So I was really alone. And I finally decided to get up and get going again. And I went out. There was a beautiful fountain in the middle there. And I went and got a drink out of the fountain. And a young fellow came up as well, took a drink, and he walked the trail. He hadn't stopped for coffee. And I you say good morning, buenos dias, and everything, and all the usual greetings. And then out of almost nowhere, he said, are you ready to go? And I said, yeah. So we walked together the rest of that day and began a conversation. And he was Spanish, he was Galician. He was from Galicia. And that conversation that turned into a dear friendship. And in fact, I'm going to Europe in August, first to Belgium, but I'm going down to Spain to visit him and his family, his wife and his kids. And
Wow.
they're excited about that. It's been a while since I've seen them. And because that resulted in a lifelong friendship, a deep friendship, that was wonderful. Also, just that sort of template of when you're at your worst, when you're ready to quit, when everything is, bad, one of those bad days. Very often that's the setup for grace. That's the setup for something just around the corner that's going to be a huge blessing. And that lesson I learned a lot along the way is when you're down, keep your eyes open for what's around the corner, because this is usually the setup for something really good.
It's amazing when that happens.
Yeah.
It reminded me in 2004, I had a 3-week trip in India, and about 2 weeks into the trip, I mean, it was exhausting. It was hot. It was hot as hell. And our body, I was with my sister and a good friend. And we were also like considered extremely rich in India. So we were like literally, and we were white, and we were in a big air-conditioned vehicle. And so when we would step out of our vehicle anywhere, we were bombarded with people, with children begging. And the first couple of days that was fun, and then it became exhausting, and then it became exasperating because you couldn't go anywhere or do anything without just being mobbed by people. And so we had candy to give out to the children. But on this, about 2 weeks into the trip, I maybe about 10 days in, I just had it. Like I was like that. I was like, just cash in my chips. And I was in a like an outside of a temple in a small town, and Maria had left and my sister had gone in another direction, and I was there, and I didn't have my bag of candy with me. And I just wanted to just sit quietly and pray the rosary and try to regroup a little, because I'd had it with India at that point. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw these 2 little girls approach me. And I was like, oh, Lord God, make them go away. That's all I could think of. Make them go away. I don't have any candy to give them. I don't have anything to give them. Like, I don't have emotionally anything to give them, like nothing. And here they come. And as they approached me, they held out their hand to me. And without thinking, I held out my hand. And this little 7-year-old girl filled my hand with pink flower petals.
Oh my.
And I was just stunned. It was like a handful of grace.
Yes.
And it was the first time a child had given me something without getting something. And I was just so filled by it. Like, I just like jumped up, let her play with my camera, and we laughed. And then my sister showed up with candy. But it was just that moment of grace. It was stunning at the time. I mean, my tears just, were just pouring down my face. It's fascinating how like the Lord knows when we're at our wits' end.
Those tears are lovely. You get those on the Camino too, where people say, "Why are you crying? Does something happened?" And you say, "No, I'm crying because I'm just so grateful." Or you have those moments where you're just worn down, and something like that happens, like your flowers, and you cry out of joy. It's not necessarily, nothing bad has happened. To the contrary. And that would happen to a lot of pilgrims along the way. Your first big cry, where you're just crying for thanksgiving, grace, not sadness, just love. So those are the sorts of things that soften you up along the way. Yeah.
One of the things I remember you shared was, obviously you were able to go to Mass very often along the way. And sometimes Mass was awesome. And other times it was almost a nightmare, except for the reception of the Eucharist. Other than that, it was very dismal.
Yeah. I think this happens to a lot of priests, especially if you care about liturgy and kind of work at doing it well, praying it well and preaching well, is you can become kind of a critic, like, a New Yorker critic or something, where you start critiquing what they're doing, how they're doing it, and all that sort of thing. And it's like, it should be this way, it should be that. They're not. And so there's that happens in us, and that's hard to turn off sometimes, but you try to override that. But when someone is leading the liturgy, praying, and they're not, there's no heart in it, they're just getting through it, they're saying the words, at least that's your experience of it. It's just that, get in, get out. That's really hard for me to be patient with, I guess. And because we have all this beautiful theology and sacramentology about the Eucharist, and then to, in a sense, treat it just as one more thing to do today, and have no relationship with the people that have joined you in the prayer, and just walk in from the side and walk out from, afterwards. That bothered me. And there was one place in particular where I was really needed the refreshment and renewal of the Eucharist, and I got one of those masses like that, and I was really angry at the end, which, I look back on and say, well, that was silly, but that was small of you. But in another way, the people of God have a right to the Eucharist celebrated well, and the liturgy of the Word celebrated well, and a good homily. And
well, I've taught homiletics for 6 years at Holy Apostles College and Seminary, so I have that experience, especially with the homily. It's like, the people of God deserve, they've come here to be fed.
Yeah.
They've come here, you don't want them to leave angry. You can have them cranky, but not angry.
Yeah. I get some of that in Ecuador, where liturgy, as I understand it, as I celebrate it, is not, I don't know, it's the cathedral liturgy is always done very well. Some of the parishes, it's just some of the basics that should be in place aren't, and so I get tired of that experience, and then I have to say, okay, it's your responsibility to do your masses your way, and that's take care of yourself and your people, and but it's challenging in a way when you take something really seriously and try to do it really well, and
well, when something can be so beautiful, and it's not, it's hard to.
It is hard,
yeah.
And so anyway, it's that was the experience on the Camino of poor liturgy was a great experience in a way, because it reminded me of how needy people can be. You never know who's out there in that pew, and praying well, praying from the heart, preaching well, trying to capture the essence of the gospel reading, usually, and to make that come alive. That you never know who's out there, that's going to kind of be a saving word for them. And that was a good experience to be ready to be filled and not filled. And so
amazing how God can use a bad experience to teach us something that fundamental,
Yeah. The other thing I think I learned from it in terms of ministry was, as pastoring a community, the fluidity of the Camino, of who's there and who's not, especially when I worked later on as a hospitalero, taking care of pilgrims in this refuge along the way, that it really helped me to say, as pastor, we need to just roll with things, and this is a very transient. The church is transient. The people are coming and going all the time. And when I was at the Newman Center at Washington State University, some of the more dedicated students would get upset because somebody that had been coming to church was now going somewhere else to another church, evangelical church or something, and or we don't have the numbers we should have, or where was everybody, and why aren't more people volunteering, and all those kinds of questions. They'd say, our job is to be here for them when they need us. If they no longer need us, if they've walked on, they're stopped here at this particular little refuge along their way, our job is to take care of them while they're here when they need us. If they move on down the road, we leave them in God's hands. And that's been really helpful to me as a pastor. And it's really helpful in Ecuador because there we have a very fluid community, and we have kind of a core group, but people are coming and going all the time. And I have to remind our kind of core people, our job is our work, our ministry is to care for them while they're here. And we do a lot of saying goodbye and a lot of saying hello in that community. And in fact, we're the only English language mass in all of Ecuador, as far as I know.
Wow.
So we get visitors. We had some people from the embassy in Quito that came down, and they said, we've looked in Quito for English mass. You're so lucky to have this here, blessed to have this. We don't have it. We don't have a community. We don't have, and also the second big city, Guayaquil, had some people from there. So we've looked for English mass, for some sort of church community in English. It's not there. So we do get visitors.
I was thinking as you said that, family life can be like that as well. Children come and children go, grandchildren come and go, relatives, and if you have that sense of it's transient, in the sense of, you take care of them while they're here.
That's right.
And then you trust that God takes care of them when they,
Yes, very, very, very much the same. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
The Camino, that we're all on it.
Yeah.
Whether we want to be or not.
Yeah. One of the funny things, one of the things you have to get used to, and whenever you write a book, I suppose maybe you've experienced this, Kiki, but you get the praise, you get people who say, "Oh, that was a lovely book. Thank you for sharing it." And you also get people who say, "What a terrible human being you are. And how could you, what a terrible book." And that's been interesting. I've gotten lots and lots and lots of text messages, mail, letters, cards about the book that were positive. But, us being human, the ones that are negative are the ones you sort of remember. and you say, I always try to respond, and I if I have to apologize, I apologize if I hurt them in some way. But it's like, how could this be such, one person experiences this book as a grace and a blessing, and they feel like they know me in a positive way, and another person experiences it so negatively. And that's been an interesting thing as well. It's like, I remember once somebody wrote me and ended the letter saying, all I can do is pity the poor people that have to put up with you as their pastor, or something like that. I went, whoa, that's digging pretty deep. A little
kid at a school come up to me once after reading my book, Islands of Hope, about my mission work in Haiti. And this 7-year-old little boy came by, he walked by and he looked up at me and he went, "That story was really lame."
You go, "Oh, it cut me to the heart."
Oh yeah, it was the worst.
So developing a little bit of trying to learn from those letters as well. And okay, what did they see? What did they, what annoyed them? And sometimes it's out of my hands. Sometimes it's something I did or said, but
there was a lot of honesty in your book. I mean, that's what I loved about it. You didn't hide the stuff.
One of the things that has kind of become problematic now is this book that, When I Walked is over 20 years ago, and the Camino has changed greatly since then. And so in the Field of Stars book, we'd have these young people, these kind of college kids or high school kids who would be walking it, but not really walking it. It was just sort of a party that went on for days and the ends. And they would have their backpacks, but as soon as they got out of town, they would load them into a van, and then they'd walk. And then before they got to the next stop, they'd take their backpacks off and put them back on, or walk into town as if they had walked with their backpacks. And so we kind of laughingly started calling them in Spanish los sin mochilas, because we were doing it kind of the hard way, and here they are, they're young, and they weren't taking it very seriously. And well, that reality is changed now. So especially older people, there's these services now that carry your backpacks for you from place to place to place to place, and it allows a lot of people to walk who wouldn't have been able to walk before because they don't have to carry a pack, which is great. Which is great. But I've had people write me and say how insulting you were to me. I know there's no way I could have carried a backpack, and you're and I say, well, it was a different time and a different experience, but I don't try to explain all that. I just say, well, yeah, sorry for hurting your feelings. But that reality of how much their experience on the ground has changed is sort of, in some ways, it kind of catches up to you. And what was the reality is that I'm all for people walking any way they can, and as far as they can, or as not as far as, if they want to walk 3 days, great, walk 3 days. But some of that I couldn't.
It's interesting because my husband and I were going to walk the last 100 kilometers.
Yeah.
2 years ago, I guess. Was it last year? Anyway, and with one of those services of having our bags picked up and staying in a hotel and not staying in the thing, partly because I'd read a couple of really books that said they were disgusting. But it was interesting after reading, and then we had to cancel because of my back issues, which are, I don't know, we'll see. But it was interesting after having canceled that kind of a trip, and then I read your book, and I was not insulted by that title, but I knew that was me. What was that word?
Sin mochila.
Mochila, which means without
a backpack, yeah.
So I knew I was one of those. And I wasn't insulted, but it did, to me, it was fascinating. And it also made me think that if and when we were ever to do the Camino, if it works out, if it's in God's plans for us, I don't know that we'd be a sin mochila. I don't know. I might do it differently.
Yeah.
And I was also thought, maybe we'd do the whole thing if we went back. I don't think it would be as easy for me now to go back after reading your book. And I had read many books before yours. But there was something about your book that gave me a different insight, I think, into the internal pilgrimage as well as the external one, and the connection between the two. It made me think, I think if we ever do it, we'll do the whole thing, and at least with a small backpack.
Yeah. Whatever however you can do it. The important thing is to get out there and to follow the way, however that happens. Yeah. I hope you can. It's a great experience. Yeah.
Well, there's so many pilgrimages that we do take in life. And
that's as I said, it's sort of this gives you a template for life. Life is a pilgrimage, and the different parts of our life, like my time in Ecuador, I have to remind myself this is a pilgrimage. This is a mission. It's an adventure. It's a pilgrimage. Especially on a bad day. It's like, okay, the bad day is a setup for something good. So hold on. So I think that's why it was so popular in the Middle Ages. That's why it's revived itself in our modern times. People need that. I mean, there's a spiritual hunger and a longing and a desire to get away from the technology of the moment and the bad news of the moment, and to sort of get low to the ground with God and humanity. And that's been a great experience for me. It is, okay, this was an experience, this wasn't a tour. I wasn't a part of it. This wasn't a vacation. These walks were getting as low to the ground with God. This was this kind of an incarnation thing, that's the dust and the dirt and the sweat and the humanity and the struggle interior, but knowing you're not alone, the people you meet along the way, with whatever they're carrying in their spiritual backpack, that it's a great antidote for us as clergy to clericalism, the sense that I'm above all this, or I'm above them, or I'm the spiritual teacher here, and they're the students, or they're the I've had young priests or young priests who are just ordained, most in Latin America, for example, ask me, well, you worked in the seminary and you've got 45 years as a priest. What's your advice for us just beginning? And I said, almost always the same. I said, the biggest thing I can tell you is that your formation begins now with your people. Your people are now your seminary, and listen to them, pay attention to them. They will teach you so much that you were never taught in the halls of your university or your seminary building. With all due respect to your formators and the priests and spiritual directors, the people now take responsibility for forming you, and you have to pay attention to them and listen to them. And when they tell you you're doing something wrong, listen to them. And we have no right to presume that we're holier than anybody in our pews, and you realize that out there in the Camino in a deep way. You realize it all the time as priests. Pope Leo has been beautiful about that. I'm humble. I mean, all I have is me, but I give you me. I think was his. I'm a bishop for you, but I am a human being, a Christian with you, or something like that. I think requoting Augustine or somebody. And Pope Francis was, of course, great for sort of pulling back the masks of superiority or clericalism that keeps us from being the kind of pastors that we should be for our people. So
I am a convert. My husband and I became Catholics under JP2, and we just feel so blessed, with JP2 and then Benedict and Francis and now Leo. We just feel like, wow, it's just awesome.
Been a great run, hasn't it?
It's like, this is so cool.
Yeah.
So at some point you felt, because you've got 2 books, Beyond Even Stars is your second. So at some point you felt like some of the lessons or some of the graces that you'd sort of sucked in on this Camino experience had worn off, and it was time back.
Yeah.
And we do need to repeat. We do need to go on retreat more than once, right?
Yeah. The second walk, I had, I'd met some people on the first walk who had walked from home, from Netherlands or other places. And so I thought, well, that would be something to do that. And so when I finished my work at the seminary in Louvain, Belgium, I said, okay, this is my chance to try that and see what that's like, and to actually walk out the front door and head towards Compostela, and which is what, of course, medieval people did. And
they didn't take a train or a plane.
and again, I was like, it was kind of worn down. You'd finished your job. Here's a chance for renewal, and so that's I did that and I had a beautiful send off. The experience walking through France was much, much different than Spain, the earlier experience. Because for a while, I had no maps. I just kind of had to choose roads. And I had a little GPS thing, a handheld thing that I had tried to set up unsuccessfully. This was way before, the iPhones and stuff. And, but then I did get some guides and some maps, but it was, you were so much more alone out there. It was much more like sort of a silent retreat almost. And you'd have days where you had a very little company, very few other pilgrims. Many times you had to stay at what we would call B&Bs. Other times they had a refuge for the pilgrims, and completely different experience. So the book is different than the first one. The second book is different because it's much more sort of exploring interior me, and not as many funny characters to describe. But it was also an exercise sort of in imagination and allowing some of the things that you think about or ponder, where your mind, you're looking at clouds and you see things in the clouds, and letting those sorts of imaginations roll. And so it's a different kind of book in a way. And I didn't make it all the way. Eventually I completed the whole thing, but that was a very different experience, but also a very beautiful one and very important for me. I was, as always, you sort of expect, okay, I'm going to have some great moments. Like the first one, opening day, you have this beautiful moment on a mountaintop. Here, I went for a long time walking with no sort of spiritual
mountain.
No mountains. Beautiful countryside, met some lovely people, but kind of waiting for God to reveal himself, to pull the veil back a little bit. He made me struggle more the second time on that.
Well, early on I haven't finished the second book, but early on there was no room at the inn for you, right?
Oh, that day, yeah.
That's like the worst.
That was a bad day until, again, opening up. Then I met Father Bernardo, I think was his name, and he was so good to me. I have some friends in Belgium that found him. He'd moved to a different place, and they brought him the book where that story is mentioned. That was what was a terrible day turned into a glorious day. Yeah. The solitude was a very different experience on the second walk through France. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What did you learn from it?
I learned and this is something I share with people when they say, I don't feel God in my life, or I don't. I said, well, of course you don't. I mean, that's normal. The exceptional thing is those moments when God reveals himself in an effective way for you. You can ask for them, but you can't demand them. They don't come on your terms or on your schedule. And we carry on. If we've had an experience like that, we are nourished by it the rest of our lives, even if it was only 1 second long or 2 seconds long. But they're rare. They're beautiful when they happen, but you can't demand them from God. And you give the example of Mother Teresa, who went for how many years without any spiritual consolation in her life. And yet we carry on doing, living the Beatitudes, living the Christian way, trusting our lives into God's hands, saying our prayers, getting through one more rosary, it's just, and trusting that when it's God's time for us, when God's ready, to pull back the veil a little bit, even if it's just a momentary glimpse, that we'll be ready to receive that. And then that's food for the rest of the way.
And sometimes we look back on an experience, it can be years, and it suddenly speaks to us of God's care, God's grace.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny, a few days ago, when I was 12, a family and their daughter, they took me to Washington, D.C., and we got to D.C., and of course, most everything was closed, but we were going to walk around for the day, and I remember it was this late Sunday morning, and we got out of the car, and the father handed the car keys, locked the doors of the car, handed the keys to the mother, and the trunk of the car was open. She put the keys in her jacket. And then just as, we got all our stuff out of the trunk, us two little girls, and at the last minute, Evelyn said, "Oh, it's really warm today. I don't need my coat."
Uh-oh.
Threw her coat into the trunk of the car, and we shut the trunk, and she instantly realized the car keys were in the trunk. And of course, insanity ensued, screaming and yelling and blaming, and it was just this nightmare, and there was no help. There was no cell phones. This was a long time ago, 40 years ago. There was no one around. Everything was closed. It was Sunday, and then far down the street, there was a car, and this gentleman, this tall, thin gentleman got out of the car, and he came walking towards us, and he said, "What's wrong?" And we explained they explained the dilemma to this gentleman, and he said, "Well, maybe my key will open the trunk of your car."
Oh my.
And it was and we were like, "What?" And he said, "Well, that sometimes happens." And he put his car key into the trunk lock and unlocked the trunk. And he said, "Well, you're all set." And he walked away. And it wasn't until 2 days ago, so almost 45 years later, that I suddenly thought, I think it was an angel.
Yeah.
An angel. He was tall and thin, like you see angels depicted but it's taken me 45 years to even consider the idea that it was an angel. But looking back, like nothing else makes any sense when I look back on it now, from a Catholic perspective. Like, where did this tall, thin man appear from to unlock that trunk and change the whole day? But it's taken a long time to see it.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
But,
those kinds of things. I in the second book I talk about angels a little bit. And people do become angels for you along the way. You're find yourself in kind of an impossible situation, and just at the right moment, somebody shows up with the right whatever for you.
right.
and to not to see them as dressed in white with big wings, but as these people who God sort of places in your life at the right moment, at the right time. Those are angels too. Maybe not with a capital A, but angels nevertheless. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. What would you say to someone considering going on?
Just do it. Echoing Nike. Yeah, I mean, if you have the physical capacity to do it, it's worth doing. Don't do anything dangerous. Don't do anything to hurt yourself. If you have a disability or a physical problem that prevents you from going, sure, don't do it. But if you can, and your health allows it, and you have the strength, well, you never know if you have the strength until you try. It's worth it. And the longer you can make it, the more that you can take time to do it, to stay low to the ground, the better. I know that that sometimes people just need a bath and clean sheets and stuff. I did that once or twice along the way. but even just the experience of the refugios or albergues, as they call them, either way, the refuges along the way, with all their inconveniences, that's valuable too. That for me was a really big part of the experience. You walked with these people, you share food with them, you sleep with them, and you snore with them. you get up in the morning. That's at least 20 years ago, that was really, really valuable for me. I'm glad I did it that way. Again, there were a couple of times where I just need a warm bath. I just need something other than this sleeping bag or this, to sleep in. Yeah. So if you can do it, do it. If you can't do it physically, find another way. Even just visiting Compostela and watching the pilgrims come in to town is or driving along the highway and seeing the pilgrims walking along. Compostela itself, the city, it has its urban parts, but the cathedral is a holy place, and the plaza in front of the cathedral, and just taking position there someplace and watching the pilgrims come in. Very often in the plaza in front, they drop their bags, they fall to the ground, they touch the 0 kilometer stone. They'll start dancing, they start singing. Somebody will start a big circle dance, and they start, and it's just a vision of heaven, really. Going into the cathedral, there's visiting, doing the abrazo of the statue of Saint James up above the altar, visiting his tomb below the altar. Those were powerful moments for me. Whatever somebody can do, if they can do it, do it. I'm not a big fan of the sort of the tour industry, I guess, because they, in some cases, they put you on a bus, they drop you off, they give you 15 minutes to go see this, and you get back on the bus and they go to the next place, and then they take you to the shop where they vend sell this and sell that, and that's fine. I mean, it's great for some people, but I think the pilgrimage experience, however you do it, is not that. It's should be a real encounter with yourself, with your neighbor, and with God over sort of an extended period. But do what you can do physically. I wouldn't ever recommend somebody hurt themselves out there. I think I say in the first book, I talk about this a little bit. The experience of trust is really powerful out there. Is you live for the most part without fear because you have this community around you, fellow pilgrims. And that's an experience that most Americans have never had before. To live without fear for a period in their lives. We're afraid of everything. It's freeing to have that experience once in your life, if possible.
And I, for those of you listening who say, well, I can't go for physical reasons or, obligations at home. I just want to say I've read so many books of the Camino, and I think yours more than any captured it was almost like being on a retreat, on a pilgrimage, reading your book. It's really beautiful. You share so honestly the inner journey, the social journey, the outer, just the physical feet journey. So much you share. to me, it was like being on pilgrimage reading your book. And every once in a while, I mean, I read a lot of books these days doing interviews, but every once in a while, there's a book that really gives us that ability to go on retreat, between the front cover and the back. And I just want to say that, To the Field of Stars absolutely does that. And
Thank you.
it's
I'm
a
glad.
beautiful book. It's a real gift.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Glad to have been instrument of passing that gift along.
It got me to reach out and find you. I was like, I gotta find
you
this
did.
guy, see if he's still around somewhere.
Yeah, who is this guy? Yeah.
This has been really delightful, Father Kevin.
Thank you, Kiki. Appreciate it. It's been fun.
Is there anything you want to mention that we've meandered around. Is there anything you want to mention that we didn't get to?
Well, if any of your listeners find themselves in Cuenca, Ecuador, look me up. Come to Mass in English at our local. We're happy to welcome you. And that can be a pilgrimage in itself. There's many, many beautiful shrines and churches and basilicas in Ecuador. It's a country filled with a deep devotional life, and it's worth a visit. So y'all come.
I may show up on your doorstep one of these days.
Love to have you.
Thank you. Okay. Where can people get your book, Father?
The easiest place is now just Amazon.com. Both of them are there. I think physical bookstores probably don't have them in stock anymore, but physical bookstore could order them if you still got a bookstore in your neighborhood mall. But Amazon is the easiest. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I got I think I probably got it. I'm famous for getting things used on Amazon if the book doesn't get sent to me by the author. So I think I think your book actually got mentioned in another book by Joseph Hurley. He did the Camino, and I believe he mentioned your book in his book. It's really fun. A lot of times I read a book and another book gets mentioned, and it's interesting that doing these interviews has been a Camino of its own. And
I imagine.
Yeah.
Well, it's great you're doing that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Do you want to end us with a prayer?
Sure. Lord Jesus, we ask your blessings. You were a pilgrim in so many ways upon the face of this earth. Your feet got dirty. You came across people who were ready to receive you and others who weren't. You blessed us with your grace, with your beautiful stories and words, with your touch, with your healing grace. Continue to do that for all of the church's pilgrims and for all those who trust in you. We ask this through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This has been delightful.
Oh, thank you, Kiki. My pleasure. It's a joy. Yeah.
Are you writing anything else these days?
No, I don't have anything in the works. I've been thinking about a couple things, but my life down there has been so sort of full. It's like writing is. I do have a blog on my website that I haven't been paying much attention to. It's one of those things like I should get back to that, but I haven't quite yet.
That's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, there's lots of things I should do, but for the moment I'm not doing too much. I have a couple things that I sort of have dabbled at writing. People down there say, "Oh, you should write a book about us and your experiences here." And I said, "Well, the hard part of that is you have to be so careful what you say about real people."
Right.
And I don't know how you would all recognize yourselves. And they would say, "Well, just give us fake names." And I said, "Well, but you would recognize yourselves." And I don't know. There's so many things. Where's the line between what's confidential and what isn't, and what was personal and shouldn't be shared? And I would be dealing with that all the time. Although there are lots of things great stories down there, but
Sounds like you get into big trouble.
I could get into real trouble. Yeah. And, not everything has to be in confession to be felt like, that was a personal sharing with you and not to be shared with the whole world. And that would be the hard part of writing about my experiences right now. You'd have to be really careful. Yeah.
Well, keep me in mind if the pen calls your name.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
And I will know, I know where you are. So maybe if I'm in Ecuador and looking for a mass in English,
Please join us.
Door.
Yeah. Yeah. We'd love to welcome.
This has been delightful. Really delightful.
Appreciate it very much.
Thank you. God bless.
God bless.